brought to you by IPAC, the Institute of Public Administration of Canada. And I want to welcome everybody to this session from IPAC Nova Scotia called Navigating the Public Service During an Election. And this promises to be a very engaging discussion with three, I think I might have in an email earlier today said to somebody this was a powerhouse panel. And I actually feel that it is, because we have deep experience with going through electoral periods here in Nova Scotia at all levels of government. And as most people who are attending today know, the Institute of Public Administration of Canada brings people together from the public sector, whether they're federal, provincial, municipal, from our Indigenous partners, and from the private sector, those people who actually help support the public sector get through the daily business of delivering programs and services to Canadians, to Nova Scotians, and to folks in our various municipal units. We have a very strong board here at IPAC Nova Scotia that puts on some very interesting programming. So anybody can go to our website and look for past events, some of which are recorded. They can look at our website for upcoming events, and many of them are free. A lot of them are in person. Today's session is virtual, and we know that the promotion kind of ran through all the different levels of government across the province, and we're expecting perhaps 200 people to attend today to hear your anecdotes, your wisdom, your good advice. And one of the things that makes this conversation today particularly relevant, I would say, is that in lots of my world, for example, something between 30 and 40% of public servants federally, depending on the institution, have never gone through a change of government. Because federally, of course, we've been living for a fairly long period through the same government. The mandates obviously change every time there's an election or a change of priority. But going through an electoral event where we may actually change leadership at the top may be a new experience for some. And I'm very happy that we have these guests with us today, because we have deep experience at the municipal level. We have very interesting experience at the provincial level and also at the federal level. So I'll introduce myself before I introduce the guests. I'm Robert Armstrong. I'm currently the Acting Regional Director of Human Resources at Public Services and Procurement Canada. I'm coming from you, obviously, from the unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people here in Halifax, Chibuktuk. I'm at the beautiful Dominion Public Building down at Bedford Row here in Halifax. And je vais aussi reconnaître le fait qu'il y a probablement des collègues francophones du fédéral et peut-être d'autres paliers du gouvernement. N'hésitez pas, quand on arrive au point où on va poser des questions à nos panélistes, de poser les questions en français. Je vais faire une petite traduction. La réponse sera probablement en anglais ou peut-être en français, on ne sait jamais. Et je vais traduire en français pour ceux qui posent des questions en français. But for the most part, today's session is in English because this is a Nova Scotia-based event, but we're happy to have questions in the language of your choice if you're here as a Francophone colleague, particularly from the federal sphere. So you see on the screen our three panelists. I'll introduce them very briefly, but as we have our discussion, you'll see elements of their story that will add a lot more detail to it. So I'll just start on the screen to the person who's closest to me. On the top level, we have Denise Schofield. Denise has a long history in municipal government, over 25 years, actually, working for Halifax Regional Municipality and whatever it used to be called before that, because now we're dating ourselves. We've gone through those transitions. And the reason why Denise is here, she's retired from the municipality. She's now working at Events East as Vice President of Corporate Services. But she's still touching on that provincial and municipal level because of the nature of that beast. Denise has gone through multiple mayors and councils, and so has a lot of rich experience on not just working with her various staffs and preparing them to go through those changes, seeing them through them, and then doing all of that, but also helping the elected officials go through those processes too, because as you may imagine at the municipal level, a lot of folks who enter council may not have a deep and broad political experience, and they certainly don't have that experience of dealing with the public servants who actually serve them during their terms. So welcome, Denise. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We also have Tracy Barber. Tracy has a long and interesting career with the Provincial Public Service. Is super happy to have Tracy with us. As Deputy Minister in the title of the department, it will escape me, but education is where she's at right now. And a lot of good experience dealing with, again, changes of government, changes of minister. We'll talk about that, I think, at some point today, because it's not just the elected officials who may change, as she knows very well herself. Sometimes the senior leadership inside the public service also changes as we change with governments. That can happen during a term, but often there's a little bit of a shuffling that goes on to make the right fit happen and to position the people in the places where they matter most, where their experience can be brought to bear, and where good relationships can happen. Because as much as we try not to talk about that too much in the public sector, those relationships matter, right? We are impartial public servants after all, but the relationships with those elected officials, and Laura Lee knows this as well, really, really do matter. And so does Denise, having been, at the beck and call of various mayors over her career. And lastly, of course, we have Laura Lee Langley. Many of you who are provincial public servants recognize Laura Lee from her many years there. And you certainly will remember at the peak of her provincial career, she was the senior public servant in the province, dealing with the premier, I'm assuming 24/7, Laura Lee, particularly during times of crisis, and being the head of the public service. And she generated an incredible reputation for her empathetic leadership skills, her ability to bring some diversity and inclusion lenses to things, and for really focusing on a renewal of sorts in the public service here in Nova Scotia. And of course, now we have her federally. Very happy to have her there as president of ACOA. Again, dealing with some senior elected officials in that role, but also playing a leadership role in the federal family here in Atlantic Canada, because she is, after all, the most senior public servant in the region. So we rely on her in the federal family to keep us in check. And in her role, she's also the chair of what we call the Atlantic Federal Council, which is the table of senior officials across all federal government institutions. So thank you so very much, all three of you, for being here. We have some conversation to get into now. And so I think what I'd like to start with is a little bit of a chronology of sorts, right? And some of you have just gone through your elections, right? Municipal elections just happened recently, just a few months ago. The provincial election took place. The American federal election, yes, I had to mention it, also happened. So we were all observers to that, both before, during, and now in the aftermath of that, which will continue for 4 more years. And those of us who are working federally know all full well that we are in the middle of a big transition. And we're preparing ourselves for that democratic event that's to come any day. We just never know. So let's start with the pre-scene, right? Before we're going through and take that lens of what people need to know if they haven't done this before. Before we go through that electoral period, as we're ramping up, as we're preparing, as leaders in that space, what's the best approach that you have found, or perhaps the best approaches that you've found, to help your staff get ready for that? I wonder who might want to kind of open up that part of the conversation first. Tracy's smiling, so I feel like yeah, go for it.
Get the conversation going. I'm not one to leave much dead space, so
awesome.
I jump in there. So for public servants, this is the show. Right. You know, we for those of us that have kind of grown up in public administration and studied public administration, this is the show. It's what you wait for, get ready for, demonstrate your value and your capability as an organization. So I think paying attention, watching debates, keeping yourself informed, paying attention to platforms, thinking about how that matches up against the work you're doing, preparing for a new minister, because you probably will have one way or another, helping them with the first sort of 30, 60, 90 days decision. Like this is, although I think, caretaker mode has some things have to kind of pause a little bit, the preparation is the show. So I find it very, very exciting.
Indeed. And so let's talk about that preparation. Denise, in your multiple councils through your career, How did you prepare, like realistically, nuts and bolts? How did you prepare your staff for those new elected officials?
I usually would prepare them to understand that as much as it's going to change, it's also going to remain the same. And I think the thing for municipal government, it's quite different from the other two orders of government because we don't have a party system.
Right.
And municipal services, it's very grassroots. It's, you got to plow the streets, you got to pick up the garbage. So all of those services still need to be maintained, and that needs to be a key focus. But as Tracy mentions, it's the big show. It's when everything can change, sometimes for the better, sometimes not so much for the better.
Right.
So it's really understanding that election period is going to be, it's going to be bumpy and it's going to be challenging. It's going to be, especially in the municipal world, you potentially are going to have 50, 60 candidates. The incumbent, you still have to interact with the incumbents while the election is ongoing, but you need to be consistent in how you interact with people, and you need to make sure that whatever you're doing is not seen as trying to help anyone in particular get elected, because that is not the role of the public servant. We're apolitical. We need to be consistent and maintain the administrative function and allow the politics to play out. But you're swept up in it because it's part of your day-to-day.
Really fine balance there. Yeah. So Laura Lee, how do we make that happen? Because I think we're getting into an interesting kind of nuance here where we continue our work. Yes, it's exciting. It's a big show. We're listening to the candidates, making promises that maybe they'll keep, maybe they'll never be able to keep, but we can't get involved.
Nope.
But how do we keep that going without crossing lines and without doing too much? And Tracy mentioned the idea of caretaker, for example. So how does that play out in reality?
Yeah, well, I think in particular, the federal and provincial systems, it's really important to go back to the systems we work in. If you look at what the Westminster system actually demands of us, it really is around peace, order, and good government. And the public service is that pillar. We are the peace, the order, and the good government. And we are the stability for citizens. So if you think about serving the crown and not serving the political masters, once they are elected, that changes and their platforms become the agenda of the government of the day. But insofar as, these really fluid periods during elections and when we're taking care, we want to make sure that public safety is maintained, that public health is maintained, that justice is served, and that we can provide supports for the people that are most vulnerable or that require, pension checks or social assistance checks or whatever they are. That's the stability for citizens, and that is our role always, but in particular during those times. So I think if you think about it in that way and understand that we need to keep the machine moving, and we are the ones that need to maintain the public's confidence in the big system. And then at the end of the day, we actually, in many ways, become teachers for those newly elected officials who have never stepped foot inside of a government machine before. And that's another interesting part of the conversation.
Lovely. I do want to get to that a little bit later, actually. So maintaining public confidence in the system, I like that idea very much, Laura Lee, that we're the constant, and folks are talking about changes. They're talking about big ideas, perhaps 180-degree turns. There may be platforms that are suggesting really big ideas. How, Tracy, do you keep your teams calm in the face of things that might be alarming to them, not because they agree or disagree with what's being put forward by a candidate, but because what they see is what candidates in the public don't, which is, oh my gosh, we're going to have to do things entirely differently. We're going to have to reinvent wheels. I don't have the budget for this. Those kinds of reactions. How do you handle your team's reactions to those things and keep them calm as ideas are being floated and debated?
Well, I think it depends a lot on kind of you pointed it, referenced earlier that the portion of the federal public service that maybe hasn't been through an election or a change in government, I guess. For those experienced civil servants that have been doing this for a while, they know the process, those platforms that you're evaluating, that if it's either a returning government or a new government, the first thing they start to do is consult the Lorleys of the world. When you were the head of the provincial civil service, what here do we need to know about? What maybe looks a bit different now that we have the advantage of having access to the public service? So normally it's reminding people these things don't typically happen in an instant. We need to evaluate all those things. Certain things will become near-term priorities. Some might get bumped out a little bit or change over time. So just reminding people that there's a whole process where we kind of start to mobilize around that agenda that this government has run on. And there's certain things that are going to go chop chop and certain things that are going to take a little bit of time. So just cautioning people that we have a bit of runway on some of those things.
Yeah, right. Because we don't change all of a sudden, do we? Right. I mean, the old joke is that you can't turn the public service or public policy around on a dime, and that's actually a good thing. So Denise talked about garbage pickup, and Laura-Lee talked about making sure that those assistance checks keep on keeping going during the electoral period. But do any of you have an example of things that actually stop as we go through an electoral phase? Things that we just don't do, or that we at least try to resist doing too much of in order to keep that public perception of our impartiality?
Yeah, I'll jump in then. So public announcements of, grants or big money or, big program changes, those kinds of things, they're all on hold. And in fact, even public presentations by ministers or, members of the Crown at the time would stop. And I have an example would be during the election of 2017 in Nova Scotia. It was a particular anniversary of the West Ray explosion in Pictou County. And I can remember us going to the chief electoral officer to get permission for the minister of the day to be able to speak at that event, because it was it marked such a profound anniversary. And we got permission, but there were parameters around what the minister of the day could and could not say. And speakers from other parties had to be invited as well to speak. So there are those kinds of things that go on hold. Things that might not go on hold might be a campaign for the flu vaccine, those kinds of things. So that stops, and we don't do anything, as Denise has said. We don't want to help parties get elected. We don't want to help parties get unelected. It just is flat during that time frame. So you really have to be mindful of not sending letters, not, advancing any kind of public policy conversations that might affect the outcome of the election.
Absolutely. And so, Denise, have you ever had any of your employees come to you with that frustration, right? To say, well, I was working on this. I was excited about this. We were just about to do this. An election got called, perhaps a little bit unforeseen by that team. And now you tell them to stop. So how does that conversation play out?
It is, because people get very vested in the work that they're doing.
They do. It's lovely, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's personal. Right. Whereas really the decision, it's at least in particular in the municipal government, it's the decisions are of council. And the staff is there to provide best professional advice, but it is hard to not take that personally if you have to stop. I would say that in the municipal world, everything old is new again, and everything new is old again. Because while it may not be the smartest thing, or you may not be able to take something to council or have it rolled out in the ramp roll up and then the ramp up of an election. That doesn't mean to say that it won't happen. It just may be delayed, and it may actually be for the better of whatever the file is or the initiative is, because you will then have it owned by the new council that is going to be in power for 4 years, and they will have ownership of it and interest in it, as opposed to taking something or having it rolled out with a council that doesn't exist after. So it's often helping new staff in particular who haven't been through it understand some of the nuances of what the impact of an election can do on policy work or on initiatives, that it actually, it's almost as a bit of an administrative strategic approach to making sure you're doing things at the right time so that it has the right focus. And as Laura Lee said, you don't want to be perceived as trying to either help somebody get in or help somebody get out.
Right.
So it really, you need to be thinking, as much as staff, public servants are not political, you're working in a political world, so you have to understand the politics.
And during electoral periods, it really becomes home to roost, doesn't it? Because we do convince ourselves a lot during our careers that we're not political, and we aren't. But during the electoral period, you realize that you're so close to it, particularly at your senior levels, right? So Tracy, I'm just wondering about policy, because I'm conscious that a lot of the people tuning in today are policy folks, right? And so during the electoral period, and of course, Denise doesn't have parties, but those of us who are provincial and federal do. You're hearing the policy platforms, you're hearing the proposals, and some of them are maybe a little wild. And as from a civil servant perspective, you're kind of going, that's not doable. Why are they saying that? They're doing that just to get themselves elected. And of course they are. Do your policy people sit down and crunch the numbers, do the analysis during that time? Or are you just paying attention to the kind of big ideas and waiting?
Yeah, so I would say it's the big idea time, oftentimes. And, I think the piece that we have to work ourselves through as public servants is, in truth, although we might start out hearing something and say, oh, that's not a good idea, we shouldn't do that.
Right.
Oftentimes there's something in there that we need
Always.
to hear. And maybe it's not like this, but maybe it's like this. And so I think really challenging ourselves to be open to where those ideas come from and what they're getting at in terms of, these party members are vying for the support of their public to be the kind of values voice of their communities. And that's coming from somewhere. And if they're elected in the spirit of that, it is our job to figure out a way to help that sentiment move forward. So I think we have to challenge ourselves to get out of, and Laura Lee's probably laughing at me now because she probably has been pretty instrumental in helping me understand some of those things over the years, that, it doesn't serve us to be positional on those things. It serves us best to think about, what is this trying to get at? And maybe if it's not like that, maybe it could be like this, but still getting at the same direction. So I think we really have to challenge ourselves to not knuckle down on some of those things as this is a bad idea.
So I want to build on this idea. I love where you're going with this, right? Because we can be positional, and I'm guilty of that myself, where sometimes I'll hear proposals being made and I'm like, no, we're never going to do that. And I've been around a while, and as have you, and sometimes I have to check myself and say, okay, that's because maybe you haven't thought about it like somebody new and fresh. So how do we avoid being defensive? I'll start with Denise. Because I know, at all levels, but let's start municipally. We can get beat up during some of those political debates, right? There's a reason why I'm going to you. And we can hear things said during debates, during interviews on television, the supper hour news, and whatever. We can hear candidates, and sometimes their actual incumbents who we're working with say things about what's happening in the public service, in government, and it might hurt our feelings, quite literally, because we're kind of going, wait a minute, I'm doing my best here, my team's working hard. We thought this was a good thing. They're throwing us under the bus in a sense, right? So especially in a leadership role, how do we, first of all, avoid our feelings being hurt? But also do that with our folks and our teams and say, this isn't truly personal, right? This is an exploration of ideas that maybe cross the line today, but don't worry about it. How do you, I know you've had these conversations with your teams.
I've had many, and because you're absolutely right. And it is hard to not take it personally, but I have, the number of times I've explained to people that, we are not friends. We are professional colleagues. And you may have a really great interaction with a politician, but that doesn't mean to say that you're great friends.
Right.
They have a role to do, and the administration and the public service have a role to do. And sometimes those roles are aligned. Sometimes there is commentary or as you say, positions that don't align. So it's really understanding that both individuals have jobs to do, and that some of that is just the politicking, and that is, speaking to a situation. Sometimes it's accurate.
Yes.
And sometimes, you have to reflect on that and go, we didn't provide the best service there, or that situation is correct. But it is understanding that both individuals or situations, there is a job to do. And as much as it may not be pleasant, it may be accurate, and it is not personal. It may be about the public servant or the public service, but it's not necessarily about you as an individual. And that is a big piece to get over, especially when you're a new public servant, because you're thinking that everything is, any of those comments are about you individually, and they're not.
Yeah, it's a really good point, right? Because it's about the work you've done. It's not about you.
And you may not even.
That's a nuance.
You may not even, the issue may not even be something that you could have controlled or influenced. It may be, I've often explained to people that, the politicians have to take into consideration many things other than what the staff present. There's, community input, or what their constituents have to say, or something else that's going on. And from a staff point of view, you're presenting what is the best professional advice, but there are other layers that the politicians have to layer onto it that may not have anything to do with what your work has been. So it's important to not take that as a personal affront.
Lovely. Just want to take this pause to remind our audience that they can post questions to the panel. We'll get to those later. So feel free to put your questions in the chat space, and we'll take a few of them when we wrap up our conversation. So we're really looking to provoke your thinking during this conversation. My thinking has already been provoked a couple of times. So looking forward to continuing the conversation. Laura Lee, I want to go to you and build a little bit on what Denise was just talking about. And not to put you on the spot, but have you ever, in your career, had an opportunity to have to pull aside an elected official who you were serving and say, hey, just maybe be careful about being more accurate in your in what you're saying about things, because recognizing that they need to jockey for position, and there is a lot of obvious truth in what they're saying, but just perhaps in the way it was said. Have you ever had to do that that you're allowed to share with us?
Many times.
This is my new face, Laura Lee.
I think we've all done that, haven't we?
Many times. So a couple of things. So just to go back a moment, it's like get a thick skin. Because we give our best advice, and then we loyally implement.
That's the phrase.
And we sign up. If we want to have more of an influence, when we should put our names on a ballot and run. Because what I think of is the voices that we hear from our elected officials are the voices of the citizens. They are elected to represent the voices of the citizens. And the pendulum swings. It just does, because that's the way our system is designed. And so sometimes, we might be working on something for a 10-year period because we've had a government in power for 10 years. And then somebody else comes and they're taking it in a different direction. And their advice or their policy direction to us is coming from the people they represent, the people we serve, which are the citizens. So we need to be really mindful of what we've signed up for. It's not about us. It's really about that loyal implementation. So, I absolutely 100% believe that. And I actually think that it really helps us to stretch our own scope in thinking, going back to what Tracy said around challenging ourselves to say, well, I don't think I've thought of it that way. Or what I have often said to team members is, particularly in the policy world, because they have so much influence over sort of the backbone of it all. Why do we do it this way? Can we check the legislation? Because I'm not so sure that the spirit of the legislation is what we're talking about. are the regulations exactly, or the guidelines exactly how we use in convention? So those are questions I pose a lot. But here's the other thing. I have many times pulled our political masters aside, mostly to protect them, mostly so that they don't go out on that plank and walk right off the end of it. And I'll give you a quick example because I don't want to.
I would love to hear it. Yes.
But back in probably the early part of, or maybe it was just 1999, 98, 99, I was working at the Department of the Environment in Nova Scotia. The tar ponds in Cape Breton was a big issue at the time. We were working very closely with our federal counterparts and our municipal counterparts in Cape Breton on providing solutions there. And we got a new environment minister who wasn't even sworn in and was being interviewed on radio about, what the approach might be, had not had a chance to be briefed. And in the innocence and the excitement of the day, we're saying some things on radio that really shouldn't have been saying. So I had to pull the car off the road, find the number of the person, call them to say, hi, I'm your communications director. You haven't met me yet, but I just want to give you some so that person could, he very, very grateful that happened.
Yeah.
That's probably the most extreme example I can think of, but it happens all the time because you really want to protect them and the spirit of and the integrity of what it is they're trying to do, because they're not trying to be dishonest and they're not trying to, they really aren't.
Yeah.
So lots of times I've had to do that.
That's lovely. I love that. Thanks for the story. And thanks for protecting the anonymity of those involved. So very well done. So Tracy, what happens for the communications piece, right? We mentioned this, the public announcements stop and all that happens. But when we move through the electoral period, and let's get to the point where the democratic event is done, right? So we're looking at a new government. It could be the same party in power, but a new mix of ministers and representatives, and obviously new priorities, new mandates. How does that trickle down, right? At what point do we in the public sector start to meet those new leaders and meet those new, bosses, for lack of a better term, but the people who are going to manage us through the next 4 years, for example? Can you kind of walk through the stages and steps and kind of the important key points that take place there?
Yeah, there is really a big machinery that kicks in once an election has happened and the cabinet members have been named and all of those things that we kick into high gear around orientation. So at the departmental level, every deputy is tasked with pretty quickly getting at that 30, 60, 90 stuff, resisting the urge to talk about all the things that happen in the department. And, you've got to kind of recognize that all of us, as I've just recently had a shift myself. You can only take in so much information at a time.
Yeah.
And so you've got to start up here and work your way down. So the department's role is to get everybody kind of moving forward with that orientation. But then Executive Council Office does all kinds of orientation of new ministers and new cabinets on practices and protocols and what might they want to change and what might stay the same. And then Communications Nova Scotia kicks in with communication training to get them ready to not kind of have those snafus on live radio or television that it's hard to walk back. Yeah. So really you've got kind of 3 months of, there's always some big policy stuff to start on, but then that orientation process is also happening in the background to kind of have everybody to that place. I will quote Frances Martin, and gosh, I don't know where Frances got it, but she is a retired deputy minister with the province. And she said to me once when I was a newly appointed ADM, let no light shine between you and your deputy and you and your minister. So, job one of building trust between you and your minister and making sure that they see you as an ally in the work that they have to do. That is one of the earliest things that you need to focus on in your senior team, building a minister's trust in a senior team so that they know that we will be responsive to their inquiries and also get accurate information and be able to spitball and have that room be safe. Like that, I think that's one of the first things as a senior civil servant you need to kind of build is that trust.
I'm so glad you're here, Tracy. You keep opening up the next stage of the conversation. No, it's perfect. So there's two things that I want us to talk about a little bit. The first one, we'll go to the others, because I think you're talking about orientation, and I don't think a lot of the folks with us today actually know that this is a thing. But there is orientation. All levels of government do it. Like real orientation, same as we have a new employee orientation. Here's the washroom. Here's how your document storage works, and here's how you submit your vacation leave. We get it, but so do they. So Denise, let's switch over to municipal. There is a serious orientation program for the counselors, right? What does that look like? How does it work?
Yeah, as Tracy said, it's like a machine, and it's a little bit different in the municipal world because, like I said, where there is no party system for Halifax, there's 17 people, potentially 17 new people, and there's not the framework and the structure of a party to kind of help them.
Right.
And many times, municipal government it's a starting point for a lot of people. So they come in with no political knowledge or no municipal knowledge or no, as Lorley said, no understanding of how to work in the bureaucracy of a public servant, which is very different from corporate world. So yes, there is orientation on the council and how just the logistics of that work, because it is, once a week public meetings and all of that. There is communication, there's legal, there's all kinds of tangible, the logistics. But another key piece that is different from the other orders of government is there's a lot of orientation on the role of a counselor as an individual and the role of council as the body that has the authority.
Right.
Because individual counselors cannot direct staff. They do not have authority over staff. It is council, the body, that provides direction. And even the role of the mayor as the leader of council does not actually have the authority. And oftentimes when you get new political politicians coming in, new candidates, new councillors, they actually think they're coming in and they're going to direct different things as an individual. But that is not actually permitted. And that is often a nuance that people don't necessarily understand. And it's a learning that has to happen pretty quickly.
Right.
Because
so are you
point, the administration is about, helping them run the business, but it's also about protecting them from themselves, especially in the early days when they don't actually know what they may be getting themselves into.
Right. So are you telling us that might have in your past had to call a new fresh counselor and say, stop calling my staff and telling them what to do?
Stop calling my staff. You can't commit to that to the public. You don't have the ability to do that many, many, many times.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a bit of a learning curve. And Lorley, I know that we have a good orientation program for the elected officials federally, and it's like a boot camp essentially in Ottawa that takes place. It's a big deal. So let's talk about that trust piece that Tracy opened up, because I think that's really an important piece that perhaps our staff don't fully understand. Junior folks or people who don't work in the policy shops or in that, that C-suite down the hall from the minister's office. How is that trust built? How do we make, in particular, a new candidate? How do we make that relationship take hold quickly and well? What are the ways that happens really well, Lorley?
Well, just going back to Tracy's comments about, no light shining, I think, Francis Martin probably also said to me, we move at the speed of trust. And particularly when it's an entirely new government, Denise would have experienced this probably way more than we have, because, in the provincial system at least, and I'm the federal system, governments tend to stay around for a bit longer, and there are a lot of the same folks. But I would say that you need to, your leadership has to be sure to make sure that minister and the minister's staff knows that the public service is there for them. And we serve. So I remember saying to, numerous elected officials, we dance with those who brought us. I was dancing with that person before. Now I'm dancing with you. And I'm going to be really careful not to step on your toes and to understand what it is you are trying to accomplish, what it is you want to achieve, and to do our very best to make sure that we are equipped to be able to achieve your goals. I would also say that, you know, sometimes deservedly so, bureaucracies get tagged with moving so slow.
Yeah.
And we have heard newly elected political folks in the last, say, decade say, we've got to be faster, we've got to see more results, we've got to see them quicker, we've got to move faster. And that is the polarity, you know, that tension between the public service and the elected folks, because they have a very, very tight timeline within which to accomplish what it is they said they were going to do. And the public service is generally there forever.
Yes.
And yet we must now be brave. We have to show courage. We need to be less risk oriented, or risk averse, I would say.
Yep.
And to move a little more quickly. And I think that if they can see you responding to their agenda and getting things done for them,
Yep.
then that can make all the difference in the world. And you have to speak truth, because some things can be very complex and very, very difficult, as Tracy has mentioned. But when the decision is made, you get on the truck and you move it. That's, I think, the most important thing.
Yeah, because that there has to turn into an hour, right? Their agenda becomes our agenda.
Absolutely, it does. And those who worry about, well, I'm being political if I actually get on board. Well, I think Denise said that we work in a political environment. So working in a political environment is different than being political or being partisan.
Right.
And being partisan is a definite no-no. But when you work in political environment, you can't help, you need to have that nerve at the back of your neck that tells you when you're crossing into the gray or not, and being able to balance that appropriately, I think.
Okay, so let's ask Tracy about that. What is that feeling? What have you lived that yourself? Have you had conversations with people who have brought that feeling, and you've been able to say, yeah, that's partisan, back down or back away, or let's think twice? Do you have any good examples of that?
Yeah, I think I do want to read you a quote because it's on something Lorelei said that I find interesting. But I haven't really had a lot of tension in that space. Like with most ministers that I've worked with, I have had a good enough relationship with to say, so I think you're kind of into your political colleagues there. Okay. Probably not appropriate for me to do that with you, but maybe you'll want to talk to, your chief of staff, your blah, 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 whoever the role is. And I have had ministers that have always been very respectful of where is the place for the public service and where is their political strategy. And so I really haven't had any big crunchy stuff on that. I think the back to the speed of trust, the relationship that you build with your minister. I think, I've been able to have a mutually respecting relationship so that's been able to be managed. Even some of the characters that I maybe thought were going to be different when they came in as a minister. And then, so this quote, let me read you this quote because it's so true for me. I actually wonder sometimes, why can I get attached to so many people and that be okay with me? So this is a British cabinet minister, 1974 quote. I wondered once again at the unique quality of the civil service, the capacity of its top people to develop a genuine loyalty to a minister who wasn't here yesterday and won't be here tomorrow.
Brilliant.
So I think that relationship is just so important to cultivate.
That's really good.
So let me ask all three of you this then. Have you ever had a moment where you had to have a really rough conversation with your superior or with your colleagues about a relationship that wasn't gelling, right? Tracy's making it seem as if she's really good at this, but and I expect that you are. But have any of you had a moment where you actually went home, maybe had that private conversation at home with the people you love and said, it's not coming and I don't know what to do?
I've had that conversation with a lot of staff because they may not necessarily gel with a counselor or with a mayor. I've had certain ones that I gel more with than others. But at the end of the day, it is, as Lorelei said, like we are there to implement the policies, the direction, whatever it is, and our loyalty is to the structure, to the institution. And as Tracy said, the people come and go. The administration tends to still be there. So it's, if you come at it going, that individual may not gel with that individual, but it's about the office. It's about the structure of the organization, and that is where your loyalty is. So that often helps you realize that, okay, we're not going to, this is not my kind of person outside of work, but in this world, this is where my loyalty is.
Yeah, and we all work with different people who are not elected officials too, right? So,
and they are not our friends. We don't need to be friendly and friends. We have friends outside of work.
You're speaking some harsh truth. I love it.
I
Excellent. Good. So how? Let me ask you this then. How do we actually? What are the gaps that we have? I think is really my question. Because as we've exposed here, we have orientations for those new folks. We have our own structures and our policies, and we have caretaker conventions, and we stop this, but we slow that down. It all seems very well oiled. We talked about the machine that this is. Any gaps? Do you have any suggestions on things that those of us, and particularly our colleagues who are going to be succeeding us, what should they clean up? Is there things that we can do better? Any ideas on how we can tighten up our ways of being during and after and prior to electoral events?
I might jump in to say that, I think having role clarity is really important, and understanding where we are in the space. I don't know that we do. I mean, I think this panel and the fact that we're having this conversation with folks, hopefully they all haven't left yet, but
they're all there.
I think this is really important for people to kind of hear what it's like when the rubber hits the road, and educating people around what it is we do in these circumstances. And I don't know that we do a really good job of that, even, because we don't want to be seen to be getting ready to escort some people out the door and invite others in. You don't want, you just don't want to be seen. So sometimes I don't think we prepare well enough during these times. And it happens every 4 to 5 years. So, we should be doing this more. The other thing I think is that we should not be afraid about preparing. We have to prepare. I can remember in 2021, during the election in August, we had all 3 party platforms. We had parsed them all. We understood where it was we might need to shift or pivot for A, B, or C government. We knew by department what the implications would be, so we would be prepared. And I don't think he would mind me sharing this story with you, but Premier Houston shared with me after that fact that he thought we were calling and speaking to them about their election platform because we were trying to, backdoor it to other parties. He just didn't understand that. After the fact, of course, he understood precisely what we were trying to do so that we could be prepared. And I think sometimes we are afraid to prepare because we're afraid of what that might look like, either to the governing party or those coming in. And that could be a gap in times, particularly in times when there very well may be a change. We don't know. But
and they may be proposing something that needs to be done pretty quick. And so the better prepared we are, the faster it may.
So best be ready. Yeah.
I think, Robert, I would add to that. I don't know that we do a great job of what I'd call public service 101 early enough in people's career. They come into the public service. When I came into the public service in 2001, I thought I was coming because I had a lot of knowledge in a particular area of environment. I worked for Department of Environment for 10 years. And I thought my job was to come in and tell government what to do about this particular area. I'm not kidding. I did think that was my job. And over time, you learn from people, you seek out people. I did a master's in public admin, so I learned more. But it was a long time before I really grappled with the role of the public service and the role of a public servant. And we probably need to be more systematic about helping people because sometimes I think the people that are drawn into government are coming with kind of an advocacy hat.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it can be a tough lesson, and not everybody survives that lesson when you realize you're there to bring evidence and data and options to others, and then elected people assign their values to that based on what they were elected for, and that part's not our job.
Yeah.
So I think we could do a better job of getting people ready for that sooner, or even having those conversations in the hiring process, because I think people need to know what they're signing on for.
I think that's a fundamental truth. I remember teaching orientation to public service for federal folks back in the day. And one of our little pop quiz questions was, who do you serve? And everybody in their most idealistic fashion would say, I serve Canadians or whatever. And I had to remind them, well, you do kinda, but you do it through serving a minister, right? Yeah. That's how we serve Canadians. And you serve a minister, and that's PS 101 right there. It's that idea that you serve a minister. Go ahead, Denise.
Tracy just actually almost took my my thought, so I'm going to build on that. Mm-hmm. There's been many times throughout my career where I've had to remind people and I guess check that advocacy role, because as public servants, you're not advocating for anything other than you're implementing what the direction has been given. And it is challenging when people come in to the public service thinking that they're going to come in and make changes and advocate for something.
Yeah.
And though it is a real struggle. So I think both of you are bang on in the sense that helping people understand what the role of a public servant is earlier in their career would certainly be helpful. And to help people understand that what is expected of you, where you can play, where there is a little bit of flexibility and where there is not.
Love it.
And because I think that is one of the challenges, especially if you come in not understanding.
Absolutely. It's a hard lesson, but it's a good one. I want to get to a couple questions that are in the chat from our audience. And I think this is touching on some of the stuff we've talked about, but let's build it a little bit. Romy says, public servants are meant to be neutral, but governments, they say, naturally prefer senior officials who align with their words. How do you feel about that, first of all? I see Laurelie's face, so I'm going to go to her first. And how do you balance neutrality with responsiveness? Yeah, Laurelie, can you address that?
So can you just repeat the end of it?
Sure.
Senior public officials that align with their...
Governments, this individual says, governments naturally prefer senior officials who align with their words, right? So who are in alignment. So how do you balance that?
Well, I can say as a senior public official and one who's been in that role for a long time, like I have not seen that. I have seen, because most of the senior officials I've worked with align with whatever the agenda of the government of the day is.
Right.
So I don't know where that perception comes from or where that comes from. So I don't want to disagree if that's the experience somebody has had for sure. But I have sometimes, we have realigned folks where there hasn't been a fit, meaning personality wise. To go back to your earlier question, what do you do when somebody's flying too close to the sun or So we've done that, but that had nothing to do really with alignment of values or philosophies or anything like that. It was really mostly is in line with, like, I can't work with that person.
Yeah. But
I would say that, hi, Minister. I would say that.
Oh, my favorite Triple L.
You're on a live iPad
live
now.
on YouTube.
Anyway, that's what I would say. So,
Yes.
So not to disagree with the person who's posing the question, but just to say that, I have not witnessed somebody who said, "Oh, you're with me." So,
but that's an important thing, right? Because as we're watching post-election in the United States, there is a change of senior officials in order to align, and that's a different thing. We do not have this in our system. We just simply don't, thankfully, right? So I wanted to cover one more question before we have to let you get back to the minister, for example, and other obligations.
This is a good example, Robert, of the relationship you need to build with your minister.
let's talk money for our last question. So how does it affect the money when you're looking at your budgets? And we all know that budgets are really difficult to manage these days, keeping all those things aligned. Do you put your money on hold? Do you stop spending? Do you realign your spending when you're actually going through these phases of election and then post-election? How do we keep the money flowing without panicking too much? Tracy?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead, Lorelei, if you like.
Well, look, I would just say that during the caretaker convention in particular, things just kind of, the things that, you have to buy paper towel and toilet paper. But other than that, I mean, things just are on hold. You don't want to tie the hands of an incoming government, whether they're a new government or a returning government that may need to shift the obligations. So I would say that that's how it works. Now, in the case of Canada right now, where we are moving into a period where we may be into an electoral run without an approved budget, then there are another whole conversations around Governor General warrants and how you keep the wheels on the bus until you do have a budget. And that has happened provincially to us a couple of times. But there are provisions for that if it's to keep the lights on. But otherwise, unless it's a public safety issue or public health issue, things just stay flat during that time frame.
Lovely. I'm looking at the clock. We're almost to noon, and I love that the ministry gave us a very subtle hint to get you guys back to work. That was just brilliant. Thanks so much. But before we thumbs up. So before we shut down, I want to give you all each, maybe a 10-second kind of this is what people should remember most piece of advice. And let's start with you, Denise.
I would say that elections are, they are, while it's business as usual, it's not business as usual. And
Great.
It will feel really uncomfortable at times. And to just know that, and that going through elections can create a lot of change and uncertainty for staff. So making sure that, there are a lot of people in government who have been through this many times, and they have a lot of insights, and they have a lot of they can give a lot of advice. But for leaders to make sure that you understand that this can feel really uncomfortable for your staff, and that they may need a little bit of extra attention or assurance about what they're about to go through, and also help them understand where the lines are and how to protect themselves through the process as well.
Lovely. I love that. Tracy, anything to add to that for a little nugget?
Yeah, I think, to my opening line, this is really a time for good public servants to shine and to show that you can be adaptive and serve the agenda that your current government has set, and to make that the very best that it can be. And under the Westminster government system, it is the will of the people, and our job is to execute on the will of the people.
There you go. And Lorelei.
100% agree with what Tracy has said. I would say remember why we're here, and remember the whole idea around what it is we do. And the other hint is, do not watch what's going on in the States. It's a different system. It is entirely a different dynamic there. And I wouldn't want people losing sleep about how it is here in Canada by watching what's going on there.
I am very happy to be hearing us end on that note, because we consume so much media from our neighbors, and it is just not the same. And I think that's a really important message. Hey, thank you so much. During the middle of a busy workday, I'm so thrilled to have had the opportunity to spend time with you. And I'm looking forward to our federal election as it comes forward. And I think we've all you've given everybody a real taste of the realities of it, particularly from your varied experience and your leadership levels. And I will just say to our audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for your input. Thanks for thinking about this with us. And if you see Denise or Tracy or Lorelei on the sidewalk, I know that they have many more stories to tell that they didn't tell here on the broadcast, but maybe invite them out for coffee and you'll hear some really good stories then.
I suspect many of them could not have been shared here.
Indeed. So invite them out for coffee, and I'm sure they'll tell you another story too. Hey, I'm looking forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks so much.
you.
A reminder to everybody that the IPAC National Conference is happening here in Halifax in September. So make sure you register, come and see amazing speakers like this. Perhaps you'll see some of these folks again in September. So thanks for your time. On behalf of the organizing committee and IPAC Nova Scotia, really deep thanks from me and from all of them. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for the
you.
time.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a great day, everybody.